Hi, Mr. Steele. Thank you very much for agreeing to interview with us.
Oh, absolutely. Delighted to do it.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Todi. I'm a writer for the Yale Politic. I look forward to talking to you about some of your ideas. Just for our view, and do you mind if we record this, sir?
No, in fact, I'd be very pleased if you record it and just send me a link.
Absolutely. Okay. So for our viewers, a little bit of background on Mr. Steele. Mr. Steele is a former Marine Corps infantry and intelligence officer. He is also, or he was also, the CIA clandestine officer, and now he's an open source intelligence advocate. Again, thank you. So a little bit about your background, sir. Tell us a little bit about your past. What are some of the things that you've been involved with, and how have they led to your advocacy of open source intelligence, especially considering your role as a CIA, clandestine officer at one point?
Well, I think being raised overseas as the son of an oil engineer opened my mind to the rest of the world. And it caused me to realize when I came back to the United States how little we actually know about the rest of the world. I mean, it's been said that a South African taxi driver knows more about the United States than your average American citizen. People, many of them whom have not left the same county their entire life. But then when I became a clandestine case officer, I was very excited by that. It's kind of like being a Jesuit priest. You feel like you're part of a really select group, which you are. But I started to realize that it was fraud. It was a fake. Essentially, we were going through the motions. We were working out of official installations. And what this really means is if you're under what's so-called official cover, and I can't go any further than that, but you can guess, the local counterintelligence service knows who you are within 2 weeks of your arriving in country. I mean, Pakistan has just blown another chief of station, the third one in 3 years that they have outed. And the reality is that any government can out an entire CIA station anytime it wants. So they're going through the motions. Now, I still had not crystallized my views until I had a chance. The Marine Corps invited me to create the Marine Corps Intelligence Center.
Yeah.
And I spent $20 million doing that. And my analysts at the time had the best equipment. They had the best of everything. And over in one corner, we were put in an old field kitchen. Over in one corner, we had a PC with access to the internet. And in 1988, the internet consisted of something called the source.
Yeah.
And I was stunned 2 weeks into this to find my analysts lining up for the internet and turning their back on $20 million worth of equipment. And I said, what are you people doing? And they said, there's nothing in the classified databases about Haiti, Burundi, Somalia, all of these places where the United States Marine Corps is likely to go. And that's when I did the proverbial, aw shucks,
Right.
what have we done here? And that's when I became the foremost champion for open source intelligence. And I'm still doing that. But the bottom line here is that intelligence is about decision support. It's not about spying. It's not about secrets. It's about collecting, processing, analyzing, and presenting information to support a decision. And that's where we've gone wrong.
Right. And when you talk about decision support, you made very clear that it goes beyond just serving the needs of, let's say, the government. You said that it goes in private institutions, individuals. So tell us a little bit about the non-governmental or non-security role for open source intelligence.
Well, I'm really thrilled that you've done your homework. And let me say that within government, intelligence has to be about more than just secrets for the president.
Right.
One of the problems that we have here is that the president doesn't really care about intelligence because the president makes decisions based on who pays to be heard.
Right.
And the same is true of Congress, which gets a 5% kickback on every earmark that's delivered. But going beyond government, I wrote an article for Government Information Quarterly in 1995, may have been published in 96, and it was about creating a smart nation. I'm the guy that coined that term. There are 8 intelligence tribes, and the universities used to be one of the most important. I feel universities have really gotten away from the idea deal of fostering new knowledge. And we have too much rote instruction, too much lecturing, and not enough communing with knowledge and creating new knowledge. But you have the academic world. You have civil society, which includes labor unions and religions. You have commercial enterprises, which includes small businesses. People don't realize it, but 80% of America's wealth is created by small businesses, not by corporations. And so providing decision support to small businesses, and particularly what's called true cost economics, for example, how much water is in this product, how much child labor, how much tax avoidance is concealed in this product, that's intelligence. Then beyond that, you have government, which I would emphasize local government is desperately in need of intelligence and decision support. Then you have law enforcement, you have the media, which includes bloggers, you have the military, and then you have non-government and nonprofit organizations. So 8 tribes in all.
Right. So why is it that the secret intelligence community has been so against open source from what I've...
It's funny because I just had this conversation with a professor in the United Kingdom, and as a result of that conversation, I did a review of the open source intelligence literature over the past 20 years. And I've come to the conclusion that the primary reason open source intelligence has been opposed is because it is diametrically opposite what is actually the real reason the U.S. intelligence community exists.
Okay.
Which is to keep a lot of money moving without accountability.
Okay.
Keep the money moving.
Speaking of money, I've been reading, and you said that U.S. taxpayers spend a total of $65 billion annually for the secret intelligence community. Can you tell us and tell our viewers what we get for that money? What does that $65 billion get us?
Well, I think it's at least 75 billion, and it may be as high as 100 billion if you count all of the black operations that are intelligence centric across Africa and elsewhere. But rather than me telling you what we get, let me quote General Tony Zinni, who at the time was the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Central Command, or CENT.
Okay.
Tony Zinni said on the record that when he was the commander-in-chief of the Central Command, and he had something like 2 major wars and about 12 different joint task forces going on, he got, and I quote, he got at best 4% of what he needed from secret sources and methods. And he had to scramble to get the rest from open sources. But the U.S. government is not structured to collect, process, analyze, and deliver open sources of information. It's all a kaleidoscope.
Right.
So 4% for $75 billion. For me, that's a failing grade.
That's right. Okay, for this next part, I want you to be unreservedly honest in your perspective. I want to ask you what the government is doing right, and more importantly, what you think the government is doing wrong with respect to both its structure and its take on the intelligence.
That's an absolutely fascinating question, and I'm going to pull up a document that I've been working on because I've been thinking about that, and there are actually 7 premises about government intelligence, and I want to see if I can find this. But let me say that what the government is doing right is very little.
Okay.
I mean, I have to struggle. Being as candid as I can be as a loyal citizen, we have a corrupt Congress that does not make decisions based on information. It makes decisions based on what they've been paid to do. We have a corrupt executive that does not make decisions based on ethical, evidence-based decision support. Okay. It makes decisions based on what they're being bribed to do. And we have a corrupt judiciary. The Supreme Court, when it found in Citizens United that corporations were people, as far as I'm concerned, that was treason. The Supreme Court is out of its mind. And I'm really very unhappy with the American public for letting that stand. So I don't see that there are a lot of things that the U.S. government is doing right with respect to intelligence other than employing a lot of very good people trapped in a bad system.
Right.
Now, what it's doing wrong? First, we're spending almost all of our money on technical collection. NSA's dirty little secret is that it processes less than 5% of what it collects. That's what I mean by keep the money moving.
Yeah.
We are not processing all of the information that we do touch. We're not doing integration.
Right.
You know, I mean, when I was an undergraduate and when I was a graduate student and I did my research, I created thousands of note cards. Then I would shuffle those note cards across a very big table and I would integrate knowledge from many, many sources. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
What we have is thousands of tiny little stovepipes. And when Donald Rumsfeld, to give him his due, when Donald Rumsfeld was briefed by George Tenet and the rest of the intelligence community on the missile programs, they had all these individual analysts coming into the room and then everybody else had to get out. And at the end of it, Rumsfeld said, George, you've got so many stovepipes coming in here, you have no idea what you know.
Yeah.
You don't get it. And Rumsfeld was right. And I mean, George has never been able to get to the bottom of his inbox. He's not a manager of intelligence. He's just a staffer that was put in as a placeholder. There are four major areas where intelligence is supposed to support government decision making. The first is strategy. And before you get to a strategy, you have to understand what the threat is. So what is the threat to the United States of America? I would say to you right now, the threat to the United States of America is an ineffective government. We have a government that has lost legitimacy in the eyes of its public. And that is the single greatest crime that any government can commit. Then there's acquisition. We're supposed to have threat information and we're supposed to have knowledge that allows us to buy the right things, the right ships, the right planes, the right poverty programs, and so forth.
Yeah.
The government is not making smart, informed decisions. Further, I point out to you, and this is why I left the Republican Party, I didn't realize when I was a Reagan Republic that in 1980, the Republicans and the Democrats agreed that they would borrow $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion a year has been borrowed every year, including this year, so that we can afford, at the expense of future generations, so that we can afford Republican welfare for corporations and Democratic welfare for individuals. So we have a government that is basically spending money without intelligence and without integrity.
So if I may ask, is this mismanagement a result of, duplicitous actions, or is it a result of just plain stupidity? I mean, is there a group that stands to gain something here, or is it just, poor management?
First off, I would say that virtually every person that I know in the U.S. government is a very smart person.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing. What we have here is a large bureaucracy of good people trapped in a bad system. And what has happened is that the political appointees and the senior officers, the flag officers, the senior executive service, they have confused loyalty with integrity. Okay. All of our senior officers, including Colin Powell, who could have stopped the Iraq War in its tracks, all of these people, and I myself, have sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, domestic and foreign.
Right.
When you are being given treasonous orders, when you are being given illegal orders, when you are being given orders that make absolutely no sense and have absolutely no justification in fact, if you are to be true to your oath to defend the Constitution, then you have only one alternative, which is to say no.
Okay.
And if you are, let me just say that if you are fired, your next obligation is to go to Congress and go public.
Right.
With your sound, legal, ethical, constitutional objections to the course of action that is being pursued. So essentially what I'm saying to you is our senior political leaders, a two-party tyranny, we have 8 parties in the United States, not 2.
Yeah.
We have a two-party tyranny that is borrowing $1 trillion a year to keep its welfare going so that it can take its 5%. We have senior leaders across every government department who have compromised their integrity, and they have decided that obeying the chain of command at any cost is what they're going to do. Well, I like to say the truth at any cost lowers all other costs. Yeah. And the truth in this instance is that when Colin Powell decided to be loyal to the Republican Party and loyal to Dick Cheney and not uphold his oath to the Constitution, he killed tens of thousands of people and cost this country trillions of dollars. That is the true cost of Colin Powell's betrayal of his oath to defend and support the Constitution.
Okay. We talk about these officials being, paid to make these types of decisions. It almost seems kind of like a bribing hierarchy. Who stands to gain at this? Who are the people at the top who are influencing these decisions?
Well, I was not really sensitive to the banking world and the Federal Reserve as a fraudulent activity until we really hit this huge crash. And I have to give Matt Taibbi from Rolling Stone a lot of credit. His book, Griftopia, has influenced me. And of course, I've read books by many other economists, including Stiglitz and Krugman and so forth.
Yeah.
But what you have here is white-collar crime at multiple levels. For example, the Federal Reserve has an inflation policy. That is a hidden tax against the public. Okay? Yeah. So at one level, we have financial crime against the public as a matter of policy. At another level, we have Congress being essentially bribed by the banks to pass laws. I mean, we actually have banking executives who have changed their name and gone to work as congressional staffers in order to write the legislation that legislates banking. Okay?
Wow.
And when they've changed their name and gone to work, that's with the full knowledge of the senator or representative that's hired them. Okay?
That's right.
So essentially, Congress has sold out. And Congress does not represent the public. In fact, there's studies now out that show that Congress makes decisions based on the party line vote, not on information. And the constituents and what constituents want has absolutely nothing to do with how a congressman will vote on any given day.
Right.
Okay? You really have to get a grip on that. These guys feel like they're an imperial power with impunity, and they are not subject to public correction. Now, most of the senior people, the flag officers, the political appointees, they're all playing for their second job. The highest salary in the U.S. government is roughly $175. Okay, most people are making an average of about $60,000. Okay, the very lowest people are down in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. The mid-level people are up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. So I would say, on average, your average government employee gets a salary of $60,000.
Okay.
These people, when they step out of government, and this is only, I'm talking about the top 10%, they'll step into jobs that pay $500,000 or more, and they're also getting a pension. So you have this revolving door. Now, in the intelligence community, which is my specialization, I don't want to get too far afield here. In the intelligence community, what we have is people who create programs and then leave those programs and go over to corporation, and essentially they've set the stage so that all of that program can be outsourced to a corporation. Now, what this means is that people like Blackwater are going to be doing functions that are inherently governmental. There's this whole issue of conflict of interest. And one of the things I like about Yale is that somewhere in Yale you're supposed to learn ethics. You're supposed to really understand how important ethics are. Ethics are how you transfer knowledge from one generation to another. Ethics are how you transfer an appreciation for true cost from one generation to another. So when you start outsourcing the intelligence community, 70% of the intelligence community now is contracted out. That means that 70% of the people doing the people's business have a conflict of interest every single second that they're on the job. And that's very, very wrong.
Yeah. Okay, sir, if I were to give you, let's say, free reign to structure a government the way that you want to structure it, to structure an intelligence system the way that you would like to structure it, what would that look like? In other words, what is the ideal that you're striving for?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Let me start with an open source agency.
Okay.
One of the things that I have been championing for many years now is an open source agency. And one of the reasons that the intelligence community has been so reluctant to get into open source is, apart from the fact that they threaten the waste, you can no longer justify spending $75 billion on technical collection if I can answer with $3 billion, I can answer 95% of all of the questions that anyone has. Which I can do. So an open source agency would not only answer all of the questions that have previously been purportedly answered by the secret world, but they would be shareable. What that means is that Congress, which has an oversight responsibility for the executive, would have the same decision support before it that the executive has. So when you're making major decisions, for example, let's take fracking.
Okay.
Fracking creates earthquakes. Fracking contaminates water supplies. And we have had a recent report from the National Intelligence Council of the United States of America recommending fracking as part of the energy solution. If I were the director of national intelligence, everybody who touched that report would have been fired the next day. Of course, I wouldn't have released the report in the first place. So we have to get to a point where the truth is on the table, and it's not just on the table with the executives in the executive making the decision. It has to be on the table with Congress. It has to be on the table with the major media. It has to be on the table with bloggers, and it has to be on the table with the citizens whose lives are being affected. We are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives by allowing fracking to take place across this country. So the open source agency is the first thing. Now, I've written several articles. One of them is called Intelligence for the President and Everybody Else. That came out in Counterpunch. I've also written an article called Fixing the White House and National Intelligence. That came out in the International Journal of Intelligence and Counterintelligence. And those have my larger ideas. But at root, I think we have to treat open source intelligence as the foundation for everything else. Now, I would also tell you that I think we have seriously neglected counterintelligence. The U.S. government is severely penetrated by a variety of religious groups, not just the Zionists, who are not to be confused with American Jews, but the Zionists that work for the Zionist government of Israel, Opus Dei for the Catholics, the Mormons, the Pentecostalists. What we have is a series of religious penetrations, particularly of the Pentagon, that I find very worrisome. We also have, of course, the financial penetration of the Pentagon and the State Department and other places. So I'm of the opinion that one of the most important things we can do, apart from having open source information as the foundation or the standard against which do we really need to do classified collection, is measured. We need counterintelligence on the other side, and counterintelligence must be secret. So please don't confuse me with someone who says we should not be doing secret intelligence. We absolutely should be doing secret intelligence. But the most secret intelligence that we should be doing is cleaning our own stable here at home. The traitors that have U.S. citizenship and work for the U.S. government are doing vastly more damage to this country than any foreign enemy on the planet.
Right. Let's just talk a little bit about your presidential bid in 2012. You ran for president under the Reform Party. Tell us why you made the decision to run and what you ultimately learned from that, endeavor.
Well, thank you. And I've actually written an article for Reality Sandwich that you can link to that has how I tested the boundaries of the two-party tyranny.
Okay.
I was unemployed at the time, so I had nothing else to do.
That's as good an answer as any.
Well, now wait, it gets better. I'm also the #1 Amazon reviewer for nonfiction, and so I think a lot. I decided to run for two reasons. The first was I did not see any candidate, including Ron Paul or Rocky Anderson from the Justice Party. I did not see any candidate who genuinely represented a bringing together of all of the best ideas
Okay.
Now, I have worked with Jim Turner, who was number two to Ralph Nader. I have worked with Michael Cudahy, who was the chief of staff to Barry Goldwater. I've worked with Jock Gill, who was a communicator for President Clinton. I have known some really good people across multiple ideological and party lines. And what I find is that our political parties, and we have 8, and let me just run them over here now. It's Republican and Democratic. But then you have the Constitution Party, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, which is the 3rd largest. You have the Natural Law Party and the Socialist parties that are moribund, and then you have the Reform Party, which accepted me as a candidate. Yep. So right now we have a 2-party tyranny that is blocking 6 parties and all of the independents from having ballot access. Okay.
Why do we call it a tyranny? Sorry.
What's that?
Why you call it a tyranny? I mean, these are democratically elected people with constituents. I'm very curious to hear why it's a tyranny.
It is impossible for someone from any other party to get on the ballot and to be considered by the public for election to any federal office. Okay. 9 times legislation has been introduced in Congress, the last 4 times by Ron Paul, which would have had Congress mandate a law, which Congress has the power to do, which would have said that all 8 accredited parties and independent candidates must appear on every state and local ballot for federal office.
Right.
That's within congressional power.
Right.
9 times the 2-party tyranny has refused to do that. They don't want to share power. They don't want independents to come in. They're very, very happy with this split and with their decision to borrow $1 trillion a year. Okay, that alone is a foundation for in my view, for rejecting every member of Congress that wishes to be reelected. I would reject them. If they have voted to borrow $1 trillion a year, they have no business representing the people of the United States of America. Okay?
Yeah.
So I've lost my train of thought here. What was your question?
We were talking about your decision to run for president.
Oh yes. Yeah. Okay, so what I did was I created a website called bigfatusa.org. And I organized that website to present fundamental ideas in electoral reform, coalition cabinet, and in taxation and revenue. Electoral reform is the root for restoring our democracy. If we cannot actually put the people back in power, if we cannot actually create a Congress that is truly representative of the people and responsive to the people rather than to the corporations that pay them, then we don't have a democracy. I mean, Jimmy Carter has said we don't have a democracy. The second thing is a coalition cabinet, and this was the second reason that I ran for president. I ran for president so that I could communicate with every other presidential candidate. And I met most of them face to face. Gary Anderson, Jill Stein, Ralph Nader. Well, he wasn't a candidate, but I met all of these people. Some of them I only met through correspondence. Ron Paul, Dennis Kucinich, and a few others. Rocky Anderson called me. And what I asked every single one of them to do was to come together as a group and make electoral reform the one thing that we all agreed on. And not a single one of them was willing to do that.
Wow.
And the second thing, yes, that's a wow.
Yeah.
Okay, these people are all wrapped up in their egos, in their little parties, in their being the person. I will draw your attention to the campaign button that represented my candidacy. It has a very pissed off eagle on there. Everybody else's campaign button had their name or their face on it. Not a single one of them was willing to run as part of a larger team. And that was the second half of my question. I said, let's run as a coalition cabinet. Let's have all of the presidential candidates run together as a group demanding electoral reform. And whoever the two are that the people like the most at the very end, those will be our candidate for president and vice president.
Right.
That was not something they wanted to hear. So after about 6 weeks, I had done what I set out to do, and so and believe me, you don't want to be dealing with the nightmare, the minutia of campaign contributions and accounting for campaign contributions, unless you're a really big party and you've got enough money to put it aside for candidates. So having made my point, I withdrew and accounted to the Federal Election Commission for my revenue, and everything was nice and clean. Now that website is still there, and I'll make one final point. Big Bat USA is a spin-off of Howard Dean's Big Bat, which my friend Joe Trippi helped create with Zephyr Teachout and a few others. We have 300 million people in the United States of America. Roughly 200 million of those are eligible voters. Of those eligible voters, roughly 50 million are what are called cultural creatives. These are people who are progressive, intelligent, and want to actually make decisions on the basis of useful information, not on party lines or ideological lines. Imagine, if you will, 50 million people donating $10 each to electoral reform, to a coalition cabinet, to an automated payment transaction tax. Right now, the tax system is essentially a means of transferring wealth from the average American to the banks. We have the 1% and concentrated wealth because we have a tax system that is designed to extort money. That's why congressmen do taxes, so that someone will come in and bribe them to put in an exemption. All right? If you had the automated payment transaction tax, then every single transaction, including transactions that are not taxed right now, specifically currency and stock transactions, every transaction would pay something like 0.006 of a cent. And that would add up to twice what we collect now.
Okay, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the World Brain. Tell us a little bit about what it is and what you hope to achieve by it.
Well, one of the problems that I see in the world is that not only are we not sharing information across these 8 tribes, but we're losing information. An article just came out that said that roughly 17% of all scientific information that's published is lost every year. People will put stuff up on the web and then it will fall off, or they'll publish their papers and then they'll lose all of the original research. And I'm not talking about the books that are publishing the results of the research. I'm talking about the raw data, the stuff that you need in order to be able to validate and replicate the thing. So what we have here is the concept, and I'm a huge fan of Yochai Benkler and Wealth of Networks. I'm a huge fan of Barry Carter and his book on infinite wealth. The bottom line here is that knowledge is wealth, and shared knowledge is the possibility of increasing more wealth. So what we have right now is universities and schools that expect you to pay for 4 years in which you listen to some old fart give you the same lecture that he has given for the last 20 years. Now, some of your professors are a little better than that. Jonathan Schnell jumps out if he's still there. But the bottom line here is the university system is broken. The university system is not only not teaching people how to think, it has also allowed itself to be commercialized. And to take Yale specifically, they're now taking money from the Department of Defense to create more mind control experiments. That is an outrage that you should all be protesting. So the universities are not doing their job. The businesses have radically cut back on research and development. They've also outsourced so much to China that they're transferring what little technology we had to China. And they're not in a position to bring new knowledge back in from China and other places. The government is not funding the research that it used to fund. And it's also funding research that's consistent with what Big Pharma wants. Let's take health as an example. It's very important. Yep. Health has 4 quadrants: individual health, environmental health, natural alternative cures, and medical and pharmaceutical procedures.
Right.
The entire U.S. research budget is focused on medical and pharmaceutical remediation. It's not focused on what can we do to keep people healthy, what can we do to stop the environment from having toxins and so forth, what can we do to communicate to women the fact that banana oil prevents breast cancer. I mean, there are a whole bunch of natural cures. There's a whole bunch of information. So the world brain is essentially intended. My most recent book, the Open Source Everything Manifesto, kind of outlines where this goes. The world brain is intended to create an open source everything information technology system that allows every citizen on the planet free access to education and information. The nonprofit that I funded has the concept that the 5 billion poor don't have 18 years to sit in a classroom. We educate them one cell call at a time. So the world brain is essentially a nonprofit intellectual endeavor that is intended to help crystallize this concept that information really should be free to all citizens.
In terms of funding for the World Brain, what is that?
Well, I have a diagram on my website, which you can pull off. And I own 3 of the 4 URLs. I own worldbrain.com, .org, and .net. If Yale would like to have a World Brain Institute, I would be glad to come there and build it for Yale, but they need to get worldbrain.edu. That's the one that I do not have. The World Brain Institute, as I conceptualize it, would begin with charitable contributions from people who actually want to see the money create money. And it's too hard to explain. I mean, this guy once asked to explain the Nobel Prize in 30 seconds, and he said, if I could explain it in 30 seconds, it's not worth the Nobel Prize. Okay, so the world brain is that big an idea. But I would encourage people to simply search online for the concept of the world brain and for the concept of a smart nation. And what it boils down to is open source software, open source hardware, open spectrum, open data, open records, combined with a commitment among the 8 tribes to share information. Right now, we don't do that. We are culturally disposed to not share information, and that's the biggest change that we have to make.
But this, of course, does not mean that everything is meant to be open, right? You did say that certain things should. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes, and look at for example, Linux. I mean, yes, things need to be paid for. But what you have is you create a foundation that is open. And Linux, for example, is finding that open source software is very profitable because people use open source software to interconnect and scale. But then they have the money to pay for the maintenance and the security and the new innovations and things like that. So there's a balance that is struck there. What you don't want is what we have now, which is where corporations are using copyright law to basically destroy small businesses and entrepreneurs. They have actually bribed the Congress into changing the copyright law so that things that would normally have come into the marketplace as public domain have been rolled back into this private stuff. And so really all they're doing is they're perpetuating mediocrity.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to ask about human assets, because now we're in a very electronic and online world. Is there still a place for human assets? And if so, what is that? What do their role represent?
Well, that's absolutely my favorite question of all of the questions you've asked. Computers are stupid. Okay? Computers are as stupid as the stupidest person involved in programming them.
Okay.
And one of the problems that we have, and today the flavor du jour is big data. Okay. Well, big data is nothing more than big garbage. Big data is data that has been collected based on 1950s assumptions and 1970s technology. Big data has nothing to offer with respect to, say, true cost information. There is no big data out there that will tell you how much water there is in that sweater of yours, or how many years of child labor went into the various ingredients of the desk that you're sitting at. Okay? That's not in the databases. Now, I like to say that we have become fond of substituting technology for thinking. Jim Bamford, who has written many books about NSA, has one book in particular, Body of Secrets. And he ends that book. That book catalogs how NSA has spent trillions of dollars trying to create artificial intelligence and big computers and so forth. We now know that NSA has paid RSA $10 million to have a secret backdoor into every computer in the country. Okay, that's treason in my own mind. Now, Jim ends his book by saying that one day NSA, with all of its trillions of dollars, may succeed in creating a computer that will fit in your hand, that weighs almost nothing, that uses almost no energy, and that can do petaflop calculations per second. And the last three words in his book are the human brain. There is no computer substitute for the human brain. There is no computer substitute for collective intelligence, which I published a book by Mark Tovey, edited by Mark Tovey, on collective intelligence, creating a prosperous world at peace. All of these guys that are talking about the singularity, they're full of crap, okay? They're basically so caught up in their technical ideas that they're completely missing the point. Human intelligence is 1/3 brain power, 1/3 heart power, and 1/3 soul power. The brains connect the dots. The heart is the spaces between the dots. And the soul is what has it all together. That's why morality and ethics matter. Okay? Right. You have to understand the contextual whole. And one of the problems that I have with computers is they only understand bits and bytes, 1 and 0, on and off. They don't understand nuances.
Right. I just wanted to get your take, speaking of morality. What do you think about Edward Snowden or WikiLeaks or these types of recent breaches in security?
Well, I want to separate the act from the effect.
Okay.
My personal take on Snowden is that he was a Chinese covert operation, that the Chinese went through the people in Hawaii. I mean, Hawaii is a place where Chinese intelligence can operate with impunity. Okay. We have no counterintelligence to speak of there. And Snowden was an overpaid, underendowed individual, easily visible in Hawaii. And by recruiting him and having him come out in Hong Kong when they did, they basically castrated Obama when he went into his meeting with Xi. Obama was going into a meeting with Xi planning to make a big deal about cybersecurity. All right? Xi's the premier of China, or was at the time. What the Snowden situation did was it basically gutted the president of the United States. And I have a long posting on my website, Phi Beta Iota, about this, and it says Xi being inscrutable, all right? I don't know what Snowden's motivations were. I suspect that his motivations were less than laudable. However, the effect has been to reveal to the public the absolute lack of ethics in the United States government.
Yeah.
The effect has been to shock the public into understanding that we're not only spending trillions of dollars on spying that has not prevented, NSA has not prevented a single terrorist incident. Most terrorist arrests in the United States are a result of an FBI sting operation, the most notable of which has been the retarded Muslim kid who was given $3,000 to move out of his mom's house so that he could maybe create a terrorism cell. That's where the FBI is at. I am not impressed. All right? So I think the effect of Snowden and the effect of Manning has been to reveal government hypocrisy and government ineffectiveness, and in fact, government crimes against humanity, including government crimes against the public of the United States. So I have to applaud the effect. Our intelligence community is not intelligent and it lacks integrity. And that's something I'm committed to fixing.
Do you think that the United States is safer now than it was pre-9/11?
No. And the reason it's not safer now is because we are just finishing up spending over $3 to $4 trillion pissing off every Muslim across the planet.
Okay.
That's not a prescription for being safer.
What should we be
We
doing?
have invaded.
Okay.
Well, if it were up to me,
Yeah.
first off, 9/11 was allowed to happen. All right. I don't know how much you know about this, but the World Trade Centers were taken down by controlled demolitions. 9/11 was a staged event. Dick Cheney.
Who was responsible for it?
I believe that Saudi Arabia, Israel, Pakistan, and the neoconservatives came together to
Okay.
make that happen. And Saudi Arabia was the primary funder and provided the cover and the passports for the various people that were allegedly involved. I believe that the Pentecostals in the Department of Defense are the ones who arranged for the missile to hit the Pentagon. And I believe that Larry Silverstein and the Mossad and Israel arranged for the controlled demolitions. The dogs were taken out of those buildings 2 weeks prior and not allowed back in. And there is video evidence of controlled demolitions having been installed across all of those buildings. Now, you can look on the web for all of my reviews of 9/11 books and DVDs.
Okay.
I like to try and protect my credibility by saying that I cannot say with certainty who did what.
Right.
But I can say with certainty that there is ample grounds to indict Larry Silverstein and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and properly investigate them. As with the assassination of John F. Kennedy and every other major event impacting on the U.S. government since then, this was not investigated honestly. It was not investigated thoroughly, and the report that was published would receive a failing grade in any fifth grade classroom across this country.
Do you have a take on what happened with JFK, just for my own curiosity?
Absolutely. And I encourage you to read the books or read the Amazon summaries of the books. JFK was killed by a combination of Texas Energy and New York money and by CIA officers, not by CIA, but by CIA officers and Cuban exiles and New Orleans crime family connections, all of whom were very angry with JFK because he was essentially pushing back against the military-industrial complex. He wanted to get out of Vietnam. He wanted to reduce the nuclear armaments. He and Khrushchev actually had a back-channel conversation in which they both said their biggest threats to peace were their own generals. Khrushchev had a problem with his generals and Kennedy had a problem with his generals. But the bottom line here is that Kennedy was probably assassinated by Hunt. George Bush Sr. was a non-official cover officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. He was present in Dallas. I urge you to look at the DVD called Dark Legacy. It puts all those dots together. Now, what's important is not that Kennedy was assassinated, but that LBJ managed a cover-up. From that day forward, no president of the United States has actually been president. From that day forward, every president has known that they were subject to assassination.
Please talk to us a little bit about that. It's very controversial. What do you have to tell the Yale community about that?
Read.
Okay.
Watch DVDs. For example, let me send you to Amazon.
Okay.
There are over 15 books on Amazon, such as The Unspeakable, Someone Would Have Talked. I've reviewed most of these books, and
Right.
if you go to Phi Beta Iota and you click on the book icon at the top,
Right.
You will get to my master lists. And in my master lists, under intelligence, I've reviewed over 300 books on intelligence. In that list of book reviews is a section on John F. Kennedy, and it lists all of the Kennedy books and DVDs that I've reviewed. And so you can go and you can read my reviews, which are actually summary reviews. Now, Kennedy was told by Robert Kennedy on the morning of the assassination that there was an assassination threat, and Kennedy made the decision to stick with the route.
Yeah.
I believe that the CIA manufactured Secret Service credentials for the individuals that were involved in the shooting. And that is how they were able to escape justice. The Dallas police were none too enthusiastic about actually protecting Kennedy. Kennedy had just fired the Major General, brother of the chief of police in Dallas, about 2 weeks prior to coming to Dallas. There's an awful lot of dots that need to be connected here. But what we come away with is that Kennedy was assassinated just as Martin Luther King was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated by an Army sniper on detail to the FBI. And that story is told in a book called Active State, and that story was validated in a U.S. federal courtroom where the King family sought a judgment and sought only $1 in compensation because they wanted a court to validate the fact that Martin Luther King was assassinated by his own government. Okay? This is what we do.
Yeah. Why is it that this information is not out there for the public?
It is out there. It is out there. But there's a wonderful book called Fog Facts.
Okay.
What you have is you have an American public that has been dumbed down. People graduating from college, I'm sorry to tell you, and perhaps Yale is the exception, people graduating with liberal arts degrees from college today don't know any more than high school graduates in the 1950s. We are in really bad shape. And we have essentially created a national information environment that is, it's a cesspool. It's a cesspool with fireworks. I mean, if you look at CNN or Fox News or any of these channels, what you have is blithering idiots reading from a script. And everybody in America has them on as kind of background noise.
Yeah.
You don't have any intelligent conversation with the exception of Bill Moyer. And even Moyer is very restrained because he understands that if he speaks out, he will be fired. PBS is not going to allow someone to be too critical of the U.S. government. So I think we're coming to a boiling point. Occupy was the first sign that populism might be coming out. It was the first sign that people were beginning to wake up. And one of the reasons we've managed to hold off this long on falling apart is because Congress has been borrowing $1 trillion a year, and the banks have been allowing the government to do that. And the U.S. dollar has been the reserve currency. I don't know if you realize this, but the day after the U.S. used SWIFT banking system to hurt Iran, the Chinese announced an alternative to SWIFT. The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, they now have an alternative financial system. They're also building an alternative internet. What the U.S. government has done, and U.S. private industry and NSA with all of its backdoors and everything, is it has essentially caused the rest of the world to come to the conclusion that they cannot trust the U.S. government. They cannot trust any information technology that is validated by the U.S. government. They cannot trust anything sold by a U.S. corporation. That is a prescription for being impoverished. We have destroyed any possibility of trust in the United States of America.
What are your predictions for the United States in the future? Let's say 20, 30 years from now. Where will the United States be?
I'm very positive about the future of the United States of America.
Okay.
And the reason I'm positive is because I agree with Howard Zinn. He wrote a book called A Power Government Cannot Repress. I agree with Jonathan Schnell of Yale, who's written a wonderful book called Unconquerable World. I agree with Václav Havel, whose book Power of the Powerless impressed me deeply. The public is a power that cannot be controlled by guns. It can be manipulated by the media. It can be manipulated by drugs. It can be manipulated by misdirection. But I have a cartoon on my website which has these 4 pigs, 2 red pigs and 2 blue pigs, eating at a trough. And the caption says, "We'll be fine as long as we don't piss off all of the people all of the time."
Yeah.
We're there.
Yeah. Okay. I also wanted to mention that you're the #1 book reviewer for Amazon for nonfiction. I think that's a very impressive title. Um, it
Unemployment helped.
it absolutely. What's your
In
favorite?
fact, let me
Yeah.
let me give all of you who might want to buy books but are afraid of the expense a tax tip.
Okay.
What I found, because I had to justify buying books to my wife, is that if I don't mark the books up and I donate them to a library and I get a receipt for it, I get a 75% tax deduction.
Oh wow.
So this is a really excellent way to read and then
Yeah.
share the book with a public library or your university library.
Oh,
So yes, I read in 98 categories. One of them is nonfiction. Those 98 categories are listed at Phi Beta Iota, where you can look at all of my reviews. For example, I have Education General and Education University. So you can click in there and read all of the reviews I've written on books about education at the university level. So go on with what else you were saying. I'm sorry I interrupted.
no, no problem. I was going to ask on a more lighthearted note, what your favorite book is.
You know, I don't know. Let me think about that for a minute. Um, 7 Years from Nowhere. It's a book of poetry by Philip Levine. It's one of the few books that I have kept. I donated my entire library to the George Mason University Library when I joined the United Nations in 2010. And I was obscenely proud of the fact that it required 3 librarians to evaluate my library. But I held back several books. One of them was 7 Years from Nowhere, the book of poetry by Philip Levine. And another was Will Durant's Lessons of History.
Yeah.
Absolutely a phenomenal book. A third book was Buckminster Fuller's Ideas and Integrities. And I've got a couple more, but those 3 right there, I think, will do it. And one of the things that Durant says in his Lessons of History is that morality is a force that is of inestimable value. When a government sacrifices its morality, when an institution such as Yale sacrifices its integrity, it loses vastly more than it can ever buy back.
I absolutely agree with you. I just wanted to thank you for your comments. It's been wonderful getting to speak with you. I'd like to maybe end things off. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say, or maybe I didn't cover that you wanted to say to our listeners?
Well, I'm looking for a job. If Yale would like to have me teach there as a professor of practice, I would like that very much.
Okay.
But more importantly, let me point everybody to Phi Beta Iota,
Okay.
the public intelligence blog. The subscription is free. We don't carry advertising. I would be very glad to be invited as a speaker to any group that will just pay my travel expenses.
Absolutely.
My Q&A record was set in 2010 at Hackers on Planet Earth. My Q&A record is 8 hours and 1 minute.
Wow. Wow. That's very. We'll hope to beat that record. Yeah.
I challenge you.
Done.
Thank you for asking me to be interviewed. I hope this is useful to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. All the best.
All right. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.